Hi, it's Emily Freitag, and I'm so excited to be joined today by Diana Leddy, who is a multi-decade educator, former state teacher of the year in Vermont, and a member of the founding team of the Vermont Writing Collaborative. Diana, thank you so much for joining us today, and we're so excited to talk with you about writing education.
Oh, you're most welcome. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm also glad to be joined today by my colleague, Christina Gonzalez, who is our Director of English Language Arts.
I'm excited to be here.
So as we start all these interviews, we'd love to just start with a story from your own journey as a learner and what that has taught you about learning.
Love the fact that you're starting with a story. Our stories are so important to us. And there are so many stories. It's hard to pick out which story to best tell. I think I'll tell you the story that led me to become a teacher. And that's the story of an experience that happened to me when I was in high school. I was in high school a good student, nothing really special, although I did love to read and love to write, and was not all that interested in being at school all the time. Not that interested in my classes, loved the social aspect of it. And when I was in high school, there came an opportunity to do some peer tutoring, which meant that I would get out of a class for a period. And so I decided that I would participate in this peer tutoring. This was back in the 70s. And in the 70s, we had segregated special education classrooms. So in my high school, there was one classroom where any student who is experiencing any kind of difficulties with learning, usually pretty severe difficulties with learning, would spend their day away from everyone else. And the idea of the program was to try and pair up high school students who were in the mainstream of the curriculum with those who were in this segregated class. And so they paired me up with a boy who was my age named David. And David couldn't read at all. David was 14 at the time and really couldn't even read on a first grade level. And my job was to do the best I could to help him to improve his reading. Was a very unstructured kind of program. After our first meeting, we basically had a time where the two of us got together. They gave me some books, and that was the end of my support in this endeavor. But I found it really fascinating. I found David fascinating. I found his experiences fascinating. I didn't really know. I didn't know that there was this classroom in my high school. I didn't know that this happened to students. He was an interesting person, very different from myself, yet the same in many ways as well. And to make a long story short, I literally accidentally taught David how to read. And I don't, to this day, I don't really know how that happened, but it was the most amazing experience I'd ever had in my life. To watch a human being, get the gift of being able to read was simply amazing. And because of that, the special education teacher in our school came to me. First of all, wanted to know what I did. I didn't know what I did. But on a very practical level, explained that, she was really struggling to serve all the students that they had put in her classroom. She needed some help. Would I be interested in volunteering? And she was a very, very special person. She made a deal with me when I agreed to volunteer. And her deal was, I am not going to ask you to run off dittos, showing my age there. Not going to ask you to grade papers. I'm going to show you everything I know about teaching, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to try to teach. And so that literally changed my life. I went from volunteering 1 period a day in her classroom to the next year. So I was a freshman then, to the next year, 2 days, 2 periods a day. By the time I was a senior, I was in that classroom 20 hours a week,
Wow.
including going with her on home visits for students who were physically unable to get to school and needed tutoring. It was all absorbing and wonderful to me. And she, true to her word, she taught me everything that she knew how to do. And so ever since then, I've been a teacher.
That is an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I learned a lot from that, and some things that I take with me now, as I became a teacher myself. The first I think is that it's really important to have high expectations. I didn't know that David wasn't expected to learn how to read. Nobody. So I just assumed that he could, that he would be able to, and I kept on trying. And I think that was huge. Means was that a magic wand, but I think those expectations gave David the confidence that he needed to try, to engage in this learning in this place where he had been previously unsuccessful, because it was pretty clear to him that I didn't expect him to be unsuccessful. And so that, that's something that I always take with me into the classroom. The second is a little more subtle, and that's that learning is a social endeavor, very, very much dependent on human relationships. This was a peer-to-peer tutoring relationship, and David had good teachers for many years, and that didn't really do the trick. What really helped was that I was his age. We were, interacting on a social level, and that this learning was meaningful and engaging, and involved, a human relationship. And then the last thing that I carry with me to this day is that teaching and learning are magical. There's nothing like that experience of being a part of helping somebody learn.
Is there a lesson in it as well around individualization? Like I heard you use the word tutor a couple of times in the story. I know that's something that's getting a lot of attention right now. People are thinking about the role it can play. It sounds like you learn to teach by tutoring. What lessons does that carry for us at this time?
That's a really interesting question, because I need to take that down the line a little bit. I did assume that one-on-one was a very important factor. And when I trained as a teacher, when I became a teacher myself, I believed in an individualized classroom. My first classroom, kids had individual contracts. I was in a school. I had multi-grade levels. I was teaching grade 3 and 4 at the time, 28 students. And everybody had their own little contract. And I spent hours and hours and hours after school figuring out what they should do next and writing on and looking for materials. And I was horribly disappointed after all of that. And I desperately believed that was the key. That was that understanding exactly what every student needed and providing a very different program for every student was how I was going to help kids to learn. And in fact, I didn't see those kinds of results. And I did see myself becoming exhausted. See my students were fairly happy, and they were working and they were making some progress. But what I didn't understand was what they were missing and in that kind of a program. And what they were missing was that active social learning. When everyone is doing their own thing, or even when you have lots of small groups spinning at once, you miss that opportunity to share knowledge, to share perspectives, to discuss all of the things that I now believe are really, really crucial, to my classroom. And I actually did, a complete 180-degree turn on that within about 5 years of teaching. And I actually now have a philosophy and a strategy that is much more whole group based. And what I try and do is teach to a full group, but think very, very carefully about the supports that I provide to individual students. So I'm setting the same bar. We are all essentially doing the same work, but I'm supporting students in different ways so that they can meet those goals.
Diana, as you know, there is not a ton in our field right now around what works in the teaching of writing.
That is a fact.
What can you tell us about what works in the teaching of writing?
Well, another fortunate experience that I was able to have is that I wound up in this small rural school where there were several teachers who cared very much about teaching writing. And we approached our instruction with just that question: what works? We all cared very much about writing. Most of us were good writers ourselves. We all had tried very diligently all of the methodology that was out there at the time. Most of the time that was sort of your classic writing process approach, and had been very disappointed in the results because our students weren't able to write. And again, we were exhausted trying to keep on top of conferences and things like that. And each of us, it turns out, thought that we were the problem. I thought that I just obviously don't know how to make this work. I need to try harder at the approaches that are out there. And when I talked to these other teachers at my school, it turned out that all of us had that same kind of feeling, that it wasn't working. We thought that it wasn't working because we weren't doing it well. So we decided to look for something else, to try something else. And what we did, now you would call it probably an action research study. We didn't have those kind of terms back then. We just designed a system where we could experiment with different things in writing and share what we were finding out with each other. And it's a pretty simple cycle. We would, at that point, we were in Vermont, and Vermont was early in really exploring, how do we teach writing? And Vermont had 7 different writing types at that time that we were supposed to teach. And we even had clear expectations about what was supposed to be in those pieces. What we didn't have was any way to get kids there. So we took one writing type at a time. We met with our entire staff. It was a small rural school, so there was about 1 of each grade level. And we first everyone shared whatever they knew about that writing type, whatever had worked, whatever they understood about what expectations we had. And then we would go off, we'd agree to try some things, pick a few things to try, and then come back in about a month and share what we had noticed. And we did this for almost 2 years. And gradually, at first there weren't clear patterns, but gradually clear patterns started to emerge in all of our experiences. And what we think works is a combination of several factors. Number 1 is to have really clear expectations for writing. You need to have an end in mind. You need to have something that you're teaching toward. You need to know what you want students to do. That sounds really simple now. 10 years ago, that not only was not evident to most people. There was a lot of controversy around whether it even could be done or whether it should be done. Writing is a creative venture. Should we really have definitions about, what we want to see when students write? So number one is having those expectations. I think we have those now. I think that there are many places that have clearly articulated what does it mean to be a competent writer. Then the next thing that we discovered really surprised us, and that was that it's incredibly important to build a knowledge base, a shared knowledge base in your classroom around writing, and in fact, a deep understanding of whatever students are writing about. When we started, we thought that our approach would be a collection of skills, that we would do instruction in individual skills of craft, and that would do the trick. And in fact, the writing did improve when we pinpointed those things and taught to them, but it never reached the level, only with a very few students who probably would have done it without us, did it reach the level that we were hoping for, the level we were hoping everyone would be able to achieve, to write clearly and effectively. And at one point, I remember we were sitting around a table, we were looking at a bunch of papers that didn't quite hit the mark. And somebody said, you know what I think it is? This student whose paper we're looking at is a really competent writer, a really competent communicator. And she's doing everything we taught her how to do, but she's just not saying very much. There's not very much insight in this paper. What she's communicating isn't interesting. It isn't insightful. And at that point, we realized that we needed to make sure that was there for students, that deep understanding. And that's why the approach that we eventually wound up developing is called Writing for Understanding, because that was probably the most important thing that we discovered, that when you write, you need to have something to say.
I just want to learn a little bit more in this space, and my apologies for the cameo of my youngest child earlier.
It was lovely.
Because I do feel like I understand writing to be so many things to us, right? And I think that's one of the things that makes it hard to wrap your head around sometimes, because I think you can write to process something that you have read or you learn. You can write to produce new learning. You can write, you have to know about what you're writing about, but then the act of writing about it changes how you know about it in these funny ways. Tell me how you understand the relationship of writing and reading a little bit, or maybe writing and understanding is a better way of saying it.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Like you, I had always experienced writing as a way of understanding things. And I think it's that for most people who write, and it certainly can be that for students. So writing can be a tremendous way of making sense of the knowledge that you take in. And as such, it's one of the most powerful tools that we have in our classroom. When you write, you need to bring together knowledge and information and synthesize it in a way that makes sense, that creates understanding. If that understanding isn't there, we'll see that in your writing. The reader will see that in the writing. And so your goal is always to reach that level of understanding. And interestingly enough, you do it both before writing and during writing. So before writing, you want to make sure that students have a lot of knowledge. And you also want to make sure that they have a lot of time to process that knowledge, especially in school-age students, but I think really in everyone. The opportunity to talk and have a lot of oral discourse is crucial in taking raw knowledge and turning it into understanding. And then when you go and you try to structure that knowledge in a way that's going to be clear to somebody else, you reach an even deeper level of understanding. And so the power in the writing is not only in the act of communicating, but in the act of structuring that communication in a way that they can understand it.
Thank you. I feel like I might have interrupted your flow with that question. So
no, that was a great question. That it's crucial.
So I had processed clear vision of what the writing needs to look like, and students need to have a lot of knowledge. And
then just one more thing that we think is really important, and that's direct instruction. Too often, and again, I think because writing can very much be a creative endeavor, and is, the kind of writing that we do in school and the kind of writing that absolutely has to be accessible to everyone, to every single student, is the writing that we do for clear communication. So that's the bottom line. In addition, you may be very creative with your writing. Your writing may serve wonderful personal purposes for you. But I think as a school system, our obligation is to make sure that every single child can clearly and effectively communicate their thinking and writing. And so that is something that we can teach. That's something that we need to teach. And direct instruction often involves some logistical decisions and trade-offs. The approach, the writing process approach that I was using when I first started teaching did that instruction on a one-to-one basis. Basically, we did mini lessons, so short little bursts of instruction. But then most of the instruction came one-on-one through revising and conferences. Revising conferences are wonderful and they are necessary. But if they are your primary means of instruction, everybody is going to get very, very little instruction. Because if all of your instruction has to happen one-on-one, you're just not going to get around to everybody, with what they need. So what we learned was to combine the two, but with a heavy weighting toward full group direct instruction. Again, instruction that takes into account what your students need as a class and puts supports under those students who need them and provides room to stretch for those students who need that. But still, basically, we decide what are the key concepts of craft that our class needs, and we make sure that we very, very intentionally teach them.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of what you've learned in that direct instruction. In particular, I feel like as I've talked to other people about writing instruction, like, some of the terms people talk about are like the 5-paragraph essay or different persuasive techniques or like sentence level instruction around writing. And like, I'd love to just hear more about direct instruction on what.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's, a lifetime of an answer, but kind of what you've learned over time.
Yeah, it is a huge question. To summarize the most important points, certainly it's important to provide instruction both on a sentence level and on the level of larger composition. What's important is the way that you view that instruction. What really helps students, people in general, tend to learn new things concretely. So teaching something concretely like, for example, a 5-paragraph essay, can be a really important entryway into helping students understand concepts of writing, concepts of craft. The problem comes when that structure becomes an end in and of itself, instead of a tool that helps students concretely understand more generalizable concepts. So for example, we use something called the painted essay, which is a form of the basic essay, very similar to a 5-paragraph essay. But the difference is that when we teach it, we use it to teach basic concepts of expository writing. We use it so that students understand that when you are writing to inform or to explain or to persuade, you need to provide an introduction and make sure that your audience has the context they need. You need to state a focus. It needs to be really clear what you're trying to communicate. You need to support that focus with facts and evidence in a way that's really clear to the reader what you're supporting and how what you've chosen supports your points. And then you need to conclude by summarizing. So those concepts are taught at a very young age by introducing a concrete structure, the painted essay. But unless those concepts are generalized, in other words, unless students are able to break that basic structure because they understand those concepts within a couple of years of instruction, we start, as early as 2nd grade, then my teaching has failed. So using structures both at the sentence level and also at the composition level as a teaching tool for introducing concepts of craft is crucially important. Introducing structures as a formula can be extremely destructive.
Diana, I'm glad to hear you talk about the 5-paragraph essay, because I often find myself quoting your book when I talk to teachers about the 5-paragraph essay. I always tell them exactly what you just said. There's nothing inherently wrong with the 5-paragraph essay. It's when you lock students into a 5-paragraph essay from 2nd grade to 12th grade that we have a problem. Diana, I'm hoping I'm not asking you a question that is too big to be answered right now, but I'm thinking about the pandemic, but also moving forward, even after the pandemic. When we think about our teachers who are teaching our priority students, our students of color, our students who are learning English, our students who are coming from poverty, our students who are often performing at lower levels than other students for these given reasons. And where do we tell these teachers to start with these kids in their writing instruction?
That's a really good question. I would say that you need to start with the expectation that they will get to where you need them to be. And so in other words, you start with a grade level expectation for writing. But that needs to be accompanied by formal and informal assessment, a real understanding of where each student is and what they need. So it's hard to describe how this works in a classroom. The easiest way for me to describe it is I teach in rural schools and I teach in multi-grade situations. So usually 3 grades at a time, even taught in a 1-room schoolhouse at one point. When I teach multiple grade levels, grades 3, 4, and 5, we all do the same assignment. We all have the same task to complete. We all participate in the same lessons. We use the same model. But the support that students get is very different. And what I expect from my third graders is at first a third grade essay. What I expect from my fourth graders is a more complex essay. What I expect from my fifth graders is more complex than that. So you need to create tasks that have that stretch room in them, so that students can approach them from where they are, but also so that students know where they're going and where they can eventually get to. Both of those things need to be inherent in your assignment and in your instruction.
It's really interesting to hear, because I think there's, across some of these other interviews, the concept of grade level has come up a lot. And on the math side, a sense that, at some level, grade level is an arbitrary construct, right? We're picking what comes in that. I think the idea of tasks spanning grade levels might not be something that we think about all that often, and yet feels so logical.
Yeah. And there certainly is, well, in writing, especially in some cases, there is not a sequence like you might have in math. In some cases there is, but that's my job as the teacher to know, and to very intentionally, but very subtly apply to my instruction and my work with individual students. We set up a system where we have step 1 and then step 2 and then step 3, and we put students in the step where we think they are, and they only move up 1 step at a time. We really limit them, and it happen over and over and over again. So we need to give them both the space and the support to be able to approach a task from where they are, but to get further than they think they can, actually.
Seems like there's something about the social nature of learning that comes up in that as well, which has come up in all of these conversations. Well, what do you see people try in the writing space, or what have you tried that we actually know we can rule out at this point? Like, this doesn't work, don't try it.
Well, I'll speak from personal experience. As I said, I find it doesn't work to approach writing at the back end, to put the bulk of your instruction into revising. I think that it would be lovely, I guess, if we had unlimited time to do that. It could be very effective, but I would still also do the kind of full group instruction that I talked about because of that social nature. Kids learn from each other. Kids learn from talking. Really interesting experience that I had. As I said before, I've taught multiple grade levels together. At one point, I was teaching grades 3, 4, and 5 together for about 6 or 7 years. And the class that our enrollment was too big, and they took away my 5th grade, which was sick. One of the things that I noticed pretty quickly was that I was doing a lot of talking. I was doing a lot more stand in front of the room than I used to. And what I came to, with just the 3rd and 4th grade in the room without the 5th grade, and what I came to realize is that I was counting on those 5th graders to provide examples of that level of thinking that was just a little higher, than my 4th grade. And that I was noticing that missing in my classroom and struggling to jump in and try and provide it. So one of the, and that doesn't work. It's not the same when an adult provides it. So one of the things I think that's really important is to provide opportunities for that, for students to collaborate, to share ideas. We learn, especially, in elementary school, I always hear teachers say, my kids can't think abstractly. They can't do that. It's beyond them. They're not able to do that. We learn how to think abstractly by watching people and listening to people think abstractly. We see it modeled. We see it happen. And gradually we participate in it ourselves. So if we don't have a really wide variety of different kinds of thinkers in our classroom interacting with each other all the time, then teaching writing is not going to work.
So interesting. Well, I know we are coming up on time. Christina, any final questions?
No, I just really appreciate hearing everything that you had to say, Diana. It's always a pleasure to pick your brain about these things.
I
so
guess I
much.
would ask one final question, which is, you know, there's writing, there's foundational skills, there's reading comprehension, there's speaking and listening, there's researching, like, you know, there's different archetypes, I guess, for how you break down this interrelated thing called English language arts, or literacy in a broader sense, right? And I would love to hear just a sentence or two about like how you would hope people view writing in that sort of pantheon, and what relationships matter. Like, what should it be a part of, and what can it be distinct from? Where does it overlap in the Venn diagram?
That's a good question. I think that they all have to go together. It has to be integrated. Writing has to be meaningful, and it has to be knowledge-based. And so it naturally combines beautifully with science or social studies. It naturally combines beautifully with reading. You can get a lot of information by reading. You need to speak and you need to listen in order to process your thinking. And writing is both a way of, as we talked about, processing thinking and also sharing thinking. And so all of my writing tasks are integrated, not only across the language arts, but also most often with science and social studies as well.
It's also been a theme across these conversations, is how much we try to treat things as discrete when they all must live together.
It's interesting. I've done lots and lots of workshops, and depending on where you, and worked with lots of schools, depending on where you go, I will often hear from teachers, I'll have them backward design a writing task. And we backward design from a content question that they have, and design a writing task around that. That's a tenet of writing for understanding. And when we start, they always say, okay, so I'm going to sit down, I'm going to list out the standards that I'm going to hit. And I say, no, don't do that. And they get very, very worried about that. But my district says that I need to show that I'm working on these standards. And I say, you'll be working on them. Trust me, you'll be working on them. And we go through, the people are usually very nice. They humor me. We go through the whole week. They do this writing task. And at the end, the very end, I have them sit down with their standards, and I say, now let's look at this sequence, this lesson sequence that you developed to go with this task. I want you to list the standards that you feel that you're addressing, not the standards you're just touching, the standards you feel you are really solidly addressing at your grade level. And they are always amazed at how long that list is, how much, the simple act of needing to produce a writing piece can push us to pull together all that we know about, reading, writing, listening, speaking, and content.
Yeah, maybe in math and maybe with foundational skills, you can kind of target a standard, but it certainly feels like for anything in literacy, you're going to be teaching a lot of standards all at the same time.
It's true.
Thank you so much, Diana. I really appreciated our conversation, and thank you for being part of Rethinking Intervention.
Well, thank you so much. It's been great.
Thanks, Diana.
Good to talk with you again, Christina.
You too.